The sun was a brutal, unyielding tyrant over the Azure Shores townhome complex, but the real oppressive heat radiated from the impeccably groomed, 50-something figure of Corinne Albright. She wasn't a property manager. She was the self-appointed HOA queen, and the shimmering, turquoise communal pool was her fiefdom. My name is Jaden, and I lived in Unit 14B, the one facing the pool, the one where I could hear everything. The pool had been the heart of the community, a watery oasis where working parents could cool off their toddlers and teenagers could play Marco Polo until the streetlights came on. Then Corinne moved in. It started subtly, a laminated note about excessive splashing, then a complaint about the decibel levels of children's laughter. By the end of the summer, the pool area had been transformed into a silent, manicured shrine to adult quiet time. The final, devastating blow came 3 weeks ago with the 16 and under ban. Corinne, citing some obscure bylaw about liability insurance, a bylaw she likely drafted herself, had locked the childhood out of summer. "It's not my fault your parents don't believe in proper daycare," she'd sneered at a desperate mother pleading for her 5-year-old to cool off. The conflict had been a slow, simmering burn, but it boiled over every time I looked out my window. Today was one of those days. The pool was empty save for Corinne, perched on a lounge chair like a pastel-clad gargoyle, sipping a chilled white wine. She was alone, but the gate was triple-locked, her victory absolute. I was on my balcony, trying to focus on my remote coding work when a minivan pulled up. It was Leela, my neighbor from 12A, a single mother of twins. She got out, looking defeated, holding her son's hand, who was already weeping. "It's just for 5 minutes, Corinne," Leela begged, her voice strained. "He has a fever. The doctor said a cool bath or a quick dip. We have no AC." Corinne didn't even lower her designer sunglasses. "The rules are the rules, Leela. Perhaps you should manage your life choices better if you can't afford a functional air conditioner. The sign is clear." "It's $300 a month in HOA fees," Leela shouted, the heat finally breaking her composure. "We pay for this." "And you pay for the insurance that protects my quiet enjoyment," Corinne said, her voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "Now, please vacate the area. You're disturbing the peace." Leela dragged her crying son away. I slammed my laptop shut. I'd seen enough. I was about to go downstairs and give Corinne a piece of my mind, or at least a legal challenge, when a large, black SUV pulled into the lot. Out stepped Benjamin, Corinne's 6-year-old grandson, his mop of blonde hair bouncing, followed by his frazzled mother, Deirdre. Deirdre was Corinne's mirror image in features, but her spirit was clearly broken. "Mom, I told you he's full of energy," Deirdre whispered, clearly nervous. "He's not supposed to be near the pool. You know how clumsy he is." Corinne waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, darling. He's my grandson. He understands rules. And besides, I'll be right here. It's safe. It's the others who are the problem. You go inside, finish your presentation. Grandma needs some sun." Deirdre looked uneasy, but clearly didn't have the will to fight. She handed Benjamin an orange plastic toy boat and a large, inflatable ring, a blatant violation of the community's no flotation devices rule, and hurried inside. I watched, a knot forming in my stomach. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She had terrorized the neighborhood with her rules, only to immediately break them for her own family. Benjamin, with the energy of a freshly uncorked bottle of soda, immediately disregarded his grandmother's instruction to stay on the steps. He navigated the edge of the pool, giggling, pushing his boat, the inflatable ring dragging behind him like a sea anchor. Corinne, distracted by her phone and her wine glass, only offered a lukewarm, "Be careful, sweetie," that held no actual warning. I saw the setup a second before it happened. The pool deck was notoriously slippery from a recent cleaning. Benjamin, turning to retrieve his floating boat, missed a step. There was a sickening, dry skid of sneaker rubber on concrete, a high-pitched, startled eep. The inflatable ring snagged on the handle of a deck umbrella, acting as a grotesque tripwire, pulling him backwards. The sound was faint from my balcony, but the sight was stark. A flailing shadow, an orange boat skittering away, and the sudden, awful absence of the child on the deck. The sound that followed was Corinne's first choked gasp. It was a noise stripped of all pretense, all HOA authority, pure animalistic terror. I didn't think, I moved. I didn't bother with the stairs. I vaulted the low balcony railing, landing hard on the meticulously pruned boxwood hedge below, the thorny branches tearing through my t-shirt. I was sprinting before my feet hit the paved path. Corinne was at the edge, a pathetic, useless figure, hands clapped over her mouth, her white wine glass shattered on the ground. She wasn't diving in. She was paralyzed, looking for a manager, an authority, anyone but herself to solve the problem she had created. I hit the pool gate, which, thanks to her vigilance, was locked. The key was a useless ornament on the wall. I didn't slow down. I launched myself at the chain link. My shoulders screamed as I twisted and pulled, tearing the skin on my ribs, but the flimsy latch on the outside gate gave way. I was inside the enclosure. I didn't even break stride as I ran for the deep end. Benjamin was completely submerged, face down, motionless, the red shorts a stark, terrible target. He had already gone beyond the initial panic. He was sinking fast. I inhaled and dove. The cool water was a shock, but the focus was absolute. I grabbed his limp, cold body, flipped him, and used the momentum to kick off the bottom, propelling both of us toward the surface. I surfaced coughing, the small weight a horrifying, inert lump in my arms. Corinne was finally moving, scrambling backward, her perfectly composed mask shattered into 1,000 pieces. My baby," she whimpered, not registering that I was the one holding him, the one saving her. Her eyes were unfocused, her world having collapsed into this single, wet, terrifying moment. I hauled Benjamin onto the edge, his skin pale blue, his tiny chest still. I knew CPR. I didn't stop to think about the irony or the injustice or the rules. I tilted his head back, pinched his nose, and pressed my mouth over his. I breathed my life into the child of my oppressor. And then, with a horrifying, ragged, chest-drenching cough, Benjamin spat out a geyser of water. His lungs sputtered. His eyes fluttered, unfocused, then snapped wide open, filling with tears. He was alive. I collapsed next to him, panting, the adrenaline draining away, leaving behind a cold, hollow exhaustion. Corinne, silent now, dropped to her knees. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at the torn-up sign or the shattered glass or the rules she had enforced with such cruel diligence. She only looked at her grandson, alive, coughing, and then at the shimmering, silent water that had almost swallowed him whole. The silence was the strongest beat. It was an absolute, devastating karma that hung heavy in the humid air, heavier than the water in Benjamin's lungs. The silence was the sound of a rule-maker realizing that her own rule, the banishment of all children, had eliminated the only other person nearby who might have been equipped to save her own family. She had enforced a quiet, empty pool, and that emptiness had nearly killed the one person she loved most. It was the moment she realized her fortress was a tomb. The next part will deal with the immediate aftermath and the fragile truce that the near tragedy creates. Crossmark, the previous request, required the story to continue with Part 3 following the massive word count and narrative guidelines set for the complete 6-part story. Since only the hook Part 1 and Part 2 have been provided, I will now continue the narrative with Part 3. Balance Part 3, The Price of Redemption and the Paper War. The pool deck, once Corinne's sterile domain, was now an awkward scene of guarded relief and simmering tension. Jaden had finally retreated to his apartment, the sight of him limping, exhausted, and bloody leaving a silent, indelible mark on those who watched. The children, initially timid, now splashed with a tentative joy, their noise a powerful counter-narrative to Corinne's past silence. Mr. Henderson, sitting vigilantly on a bench, was an unofficial, non-HOA-sanctioned lifeguard, a clear statement of community defiance. Corinne remained on the lounge chair for nearly an hour, a statue of defeat. When she finally rose, she wasn't the impeccably coiffed queen. She was a woman whose foundation had cracked. She ignored the few neighbors who approached her with awkward, pitying glances. Her only destination was her home, Unit 1A, the largest, most strategically placed townhome, and her only immediate goal was to talk to her daughter. Deirdre, still at the hospital, answered the phone, her voice strained with exhaustion and lingering fear. "Mom, Benjamin is stable. They're just keeping him overnight for observation," Deirdre said, her tone cold and distant. "The nurse said his reflexes were slow. They said another minute, maybe less." Corinne couldn't bring herself to apologize, not yet. The words were a mountain too high to climb. "Deirdre, I was distracted. I told him to stay on the steps." "You told him to stay on the steps in a pool you banned him from, Mom." Deirdre's voice suddenly sharpened, lashing out with years of repressed resentment. "Do you have any idea how bad this is? You've spent months being a tyrant, turning the pool into your private, child-free spa, and your own rules nearly drowned your grandson." "The rules," Corinne stammered, falling back on her defense. Don't talk to me about rules, Mother. If Jaden hadn't been watching, Jaden, the boy you cited 3 times for having a non-regulation doormat, Benjamin, would be dead. Do you understand that? The boy you tried to fine and intimidate saved my son. What does that say about your priorities, Mom? The line went dead. The realization hit Karen harder than any reprimand. Her own daughter was now aligned with the enemy, united by the sheer, undeniable reality of Jaden's selfless action. The next morning, the fragile truce was shattered by the arrival of a thick, official-looking envelope slid under Jaden's door. It wasn't from Karen. It was from the HOA board's attorney, Davis, Thorne, and Associates. Jaden tore it open, his exhaustion turning instantly to white-hot anger. The document was a formal notice of violation and a demand for damages. It detailed his violations. Unauthorized entry, violating the secured pool area, $500 fine. Destruction of community property, damage to the perimeter fence latch and landscaping, estimated repair $1,200. Disruption of quiet enjoyment, causing distress to a community member. The distressed member was unnamed but clearly Karen, and the fine was punitive, $1,000. The total demand was nearly $2,700, and they threatened immediate litigation if he did not comply within 48 hours. The letter was signed not by Karen, but by Richard Tannenbaum, the nominal HOA president, a spineless man Karen had hand-selected and controlled for years. Jaden understood instantly. Karen was trying to use the system she controlled to neutralize the hero, to bury the guilt, and to restore her damaged authority. She couldn't emotionally acknowledge that he saved her grandson, so she was resorting to the only language she knew, legalistic power. She was fighting fire with paper. Jaden, however, was a coder, an analyst, and surprisingly, a meticulous record keeper. He gathered his own arsenal. Evidence of damage, photos of his own bloody, cut ribs, the torn shirt, and the perfectly fine state of the fence latch, which Marcus had already repaired with a simple wire tie. The claim was grossly inflated. The bylaws. He had spent the previous winter reading every single line of the HOA charter, looking for loopholes in Karen's despotism. He found one, Article V, Section 3B, emergency access, which explicitly stated that in case of immediate threat to life, all reasonable means of access are permitted. Witnesses, Leela, Mr. Henderson, and several other parents who had seen the incident, including the initial near-drowning and Karen's paralysis. Jaden drafted his response to the lawyer, precise and devastatingly logical. He began by citing the emergency access bylaw, nullifying the unauthorized entry fine. For the property damage, he argued the costs were inflated and that he would seek to crowdfund the actual repair cost, which was minimal. But his real weapon was the counterclaim, directed not at the fine but at Karen's authority. He sent a copy of his rebuttal, along with a certified letter, directly to Richard Tannenbaum, the puppet president. In the letter, Jaden formally demanded immediate removal of the 16 and under pool ban, citing Karen's own failure to enforce it with her family, which created an arbitrary and capricious enforcement standard. A formal investigation into Karen Albright's conduct, arguing that her negligence in supervising her grandson, combined with her prior policy of banning all potential rescuers, children, and their supervising parents, constituted a reckless endangerment of community members. An emergency HOA meeting to vote on a motion to remove Karen Albright from the board of directors for abuse of power and creation of a hostile environment. Jaden finished the letter, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He wasn't just defending himself, he was mounting a calculated coup. He had traded a spontaneous act of heroism for a strategic campaign of justice. He sealed the envelopes, his hands steady. He knew this would push Karen past her breaking point. She thought she could silence him with a legal threat. She was about to find out that the man who saved her grandson was now coming for her crown. The strong beat at the end of Part 3 is strategic justice. Karen tries to use her legal authority to crush Jaden and suppress the guilt of the accident. Jaden counters this with a formal, devastating legal and procedural attack, turning his act of heroism into a weapon to strip Karen of her power. The battle has moved from the emotional realm of the pool deck to the structured, high-stakes conflict of the HOA bylaws, setting the stage for a dramatic showdown.